Coming up as training camp gets underway for your New York Football Giants. Yes, Saquon Barkley will be there, but was this the plan all along? And in the meantime, one big man named Andrew Thomas inks a fresh new deal as we break down all the latest on Big Blue. Coming up next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your hosts over here. Adam Arbrecht breaking down your Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast and your New Jersey Devils on Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for being a part of this show with one season ticket holder, generational, the man, the myth, the legend, Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir, on a Wednesday morning?
I mean, I'm definitely not doing as good as Joe Schoen is. I'll tell you that, Adam, because that man is doing some work. If you think you've been very busy with all the different podcast Locked On Nets things that you're doing, Joe Schoen may have just said, "Hold my beer" for a second.
I tried to sign some people to some big deals, but the problem is I don't have the Mara Tish checkbook sitting in my pocket unless I misplaced it, which is entirely possible. But to your point, man, there's a lot to cover here. We are going to get to Saquon Barkley, the news of yesterday, but the news of today, early in the morning, is that Andrew Thomas gets that extension, gets the new deal, 5 years, $117 million. Continuing, to your point, Joe Schoen's just, I don't know, minted in gold GM status for the New York Football Giants because he seems to be doing everything correctly. Not surprised that they wanted to get a contract with Andrew Thomas. Are you surprised that it just kind of snap of the fingers? Hey, guess what? Training camp's starting, and we've officially locked up Andrew Thomas for the next 5 years.
I am not surprised at all. And if anyone thinks for 1 second that the timing of this is purely coincidental, they would be incorrect, Adam. Think of it this way. Saquon Barkley, running back market, not getting enough money. I'm upset. What are we doing? Zoom calls, this, that, the other thing. All that stuff happens, right? And then all of a sudden, we'll get to the Saquon Barkley signing his contract yesterday. If you think that Joe Schoen didn't sequence these things with a purpose, you'd be mistaken, because the last thing you'd want to do is hand Andrew Thomas a record-breaking contract while you're still in negotiations over what most people would consider nickels and dimes at the running back position. He's scratching and clawing to get a couple $1,000 more into his contract, and then Andrew Thomas blows it out of the water. Good on Joe Schoen. He probably had this deal gift wrapped, tied up with a nice little bow weeks ago, but wanted to make sure that he took care of all the other pieces of business that were a priority in front of him.
Yeah, I mean, listen, not that, because it's been different this offseason and even last offseason too with Joe Schoen as the GM. Things have been different as far as the fan base is concerned. Like, there hasn't been as much questioning, right? You kind of trust that Joe Schoen is doing things the right way. So while there wouldn't be an impetus to do this, immediately, I think it is also just like, hey, how about some good vibes, right? Like, whatever's gone on with Saquon Barkley, it's like, man, it's unfortunate that it's gone this way from the market, as you mentioned. We'll get a little more in depth with that. But to be able to just be like, oh, by the way, $117 million contract for Andrew Thomas, not going anywhere, right? Like, cornerstone of the offensive line. It's the kind of thing, again, that you can even go back and look at Daniel Jones. That was not an immediate, no worries kind of process. They had to go back and forth, setting a high bar, coming back down, whatever, and then trying to find a happy medium with it. There was no negotiations, that we're hearing about. I'm sure they'll say, they've been talking about this going back to last year, maybe. Maybe this was one of the quiet things that Joe Schoen was trying to do at some point last year, and it just, hey, listen, it didn't come up. That's no big deal. It just, hey, we're done. Yeah, all done. 5 years, 117. No problem. Nothing to worry about here. And by the way, just to your point, it's like, no, we got money. Yeah, we have plenty of money. It's just about, we're going to allocate it where it makes sense, and we're not going to make. I was getting to this on Twitter yesterday with some people, oddly enough, about our former GM and Dave Gettleman, and it was just saying, like, we've always talked about this. The misses were bad, the hits were pretty good. They're going through the draft picks, whatever. But I was like, free agency, and this lumps into it. Potential free agency, the mismanagement of allocating money was so severe that it ended up putting the franchise in a really difficult spot. you're not going to look back over the next couple of seasons and doubt, question, or be concerned about the money that you're paying to Andrew Thomas, one of proven last season best left tackles in the NFL.
Yeah, Adam, you mentioned not regretting giving Andrew Thomas his contract. Let's keep a couple things in mind. One, he is still super young, right? He signed it at 24 years old. You're getting 5 years of prime Andrew Thomas in this. And you know what's great about the headlines? And this was really smart. Obviously, Andrew Thomas is free agent. His age sports agency wanted to make sure that they got some of the big headlines. One, most guaranteed money for any offensive lineman ever in Andrew Thomas was $67 million guaranteed. That's a huge one. The second one is, oh, he just coincidentally has a higher average annual value by a couple $100,000 over both Trent Williams and a couple of other players, most notably like Ronnie Staley and David Bakhtiari. It's about $23 million. So not only did his agency get the most guaranteed money ever, he also got a little bit more average annual value. But the Giants are willing to do all of that. $67 million at $23 million a year is basically guaranteeing 3 years of Andrew Thomas from right now till later. You're getting his age 24 to 27 years old. You're talking about prime Andrew Thomas. And this is just a huge win for the Giants and Joe Schoen. We know that the cap is going to explode with some of the TV contracts that are coming up. The fact that we have Andrew Thomas under team control till 2029 is incredible, knowing that offensive tackles, the next left tackle up, if once the cap goes up, may get $30 million a year. In 18 months' time, this deal for the Giants could look like a steal. But you also can't blame Andrew Thomas for taking the deal. Like, you're getting the most guaranteed money ever. You're getting the biggest annual average salary. Why not lock it in now? Just focus on football and be with the organization that drafted you.
Oh, of course. And like you say, the average salary of $23.5 million. You mentioned the $67 million guaranteed. That's spread out over the course of this contract is going to be, you do the quick back of the napkin math. It's like 13, a little north of 13 million a year average guaranteed money. It's just in a world of where Jaylen Brown, by the way, for the Boston Celtics, just inked a $303 million deal, which, by the way, stop being running backs, kids, go be NBA players, even, to whatever level you can be. But when you see that type of number and those type of contracts, man, relative to the talent and the importance that Andrew Thomas is, this feels like an absolute steal for the Giants. So we'll continue to talk about it. Yeah, go ahead.
One more thing I wanted to, and maybe this will be a nice segue, but we talk about Dave Gettleman mismanaging free agency. He signed Jonathan Stewart. Golden Tate was a disaster. Kenny Golladay didn't work out. There was a whole host of dollars and cents that he gave out to free agents that didn't work out for the Giants. Let's just keep in mind, this offseason, Joe Schoen locked up young defensive tackle Dexter Lawrence, franchise quarterback Daniel Jones, offensive tackle Andrew Thomas, and now Saquon Barkley is under the tag as one of the better running backs in the league. Those were 4 first-round draft picks by Dave Gettleman. So while he has had big swings and misses, a lot of these cornerstones that are getting second contracts from the Giants did originally get drafted by Dave Gettleman.
Yeah, Daniel Jones included among them, right? Like the reality is that, again, and this isn't the Dave Gettleman show, but at some point, and I think you'll back me up on this, Andy, I was the one who was willing to. I was like, I get it. The mistakes were absolutely a mess, but, and this is true of all NFL drafts, by the way, give me 2 or 3 years to find out and evaluate. A fresh GM comes in, and if you have your franchise quarterback, your cornerstone tackle, your cornerstone defensive lineman, right, like. There's a lot of boxes being checked right now coming out of the draft class. And someone said this to me on Twitter: great talent evaluator, horrible GM for Dave Gettleman. I was like, not a terrible way to encapsulate. It might be the best way to encapsulate Dave Gettleman. He knew where the talent was. He just was an absolute disaster when it came to what you wanted to do. And I did, even as we transition here into Saquon Barkley, I did say that even though as a pure talent, Saquon Barkley is a guy any team would want, it still remains a mistake to have drafted him second overall. And we talked about this last week, $31 million already earned by Saquon Barkley on his rookie deal. I'll acknowledge it. I think a lot of people were surprised. Hey, you can still negotiate a 1-year deal, even if you haven't quite signed that 1-year franchise tag yet. All of this work, $117 million for Andrew Thomas, an extra $900,000 for Saquon Barkley. He ends up signing a 1-year, $11 million contract to get himself into camp immediately and be with the team this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that you said with Dave Gettleman before we flip over to Saquon Barkley is you're
Mhm.
like terrible at contracts, probably terrible also like anything off the field related, right? Like getting a contract done, understanding what type of player you have in a guy like I don't know DeAndre Baker or Kadarius Toney, like all of that probably didn't work out for Gettleman, but yeah,
Yeah.
nailed some of those first round picks. One of them being Saquon Barkley, and
Yeah.
obviously it's not about the talent, it's not about the skill or the explosiveness. It's just where the current state is of the running back market. I mean, it's not us. Look at the running backs. They're getting on Zoom calls together, forming like mini alliances and unions because they're just not being able to get paid very much, which I find fascinating.
Can I actually? Yeah, because we'll get into some of the details of Saquon and what this kind of means. Fans were excited, as they should be. Like I'm very happy that it'll be in there because to hear from former NFL running backs to not be a part of camp that can linger into the season. It can be weeks 4, weeks 5, weeks 6 before you have your legs fully underneath you. Like make no mistake about it, it was going to have a 1-to-1 impact on the New York Football Giants and their ability to be successful early in the year. So Saquon being in there is great. He gets on the Zoom call with Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry is in there as well. Not a guy that's in the middle of a contract negotiation, but just saying, how do we help lift up this running back room? And some of the comedy coming out of it is like, what was the conversation? Because Saquon Barkley within about 36 hours was like, yeah, okay, give me an extra, $900,000. I'm back in the room. Now, there's another angle to this that I do want to get to, but to me, this is a combination of the reality of the situation. Like, okay, great, the market's terrible. There's nothing you can do about it. And two, that Saquon Barkley, for all of his desires to get paid what he feels like he deserves and has earned already in his career, he did not want to not be a part of training camp, not be getting better with his teammates, right? Like there are when it comes to athletes that I think can be a little more me first driven. That's never seemingly been a part of Saquon Barkley's makeup. And I think maybe, again, maybe Joe Schoen knew that and was like, I just don't think that you're going to stay away all that long, even if you were going to hold out on the tag.
So I've been thinking more and more about this. If Joe Schoen looked at Saquon Barkley and said, Saquon, what would you do if you were in my position? I think Saquon would actually take a moment, take a pause, and say, that's right. You do have me under team control for a couple years. I think I'm worth more. But like the reality is, Joe Schoen literally has all the leverage. Like there was nothing that Saquon could do other than something that would also be self-sabotaging to him, which is sit out, miss training camp, miss games, et cetera, et cetera. You already mentioned that isn't in his DNA. Uh,
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley had literally zero leverage in this situation. And I think Saquon said, the longer I'm away from the team, the more I sit out, like it's not going to benefit me in the long run of getting a contract done with the Giants. And so once all of the scar tissue wore away from the negotiations and not getting something done before the tag, Joe Schoen could have just said, we'll see you in camp, Saquon. Like, whenever you show up, you show up. But instead, he went back to their agents, started negotiating and saying, we can do a little bit more this year as a sign of good faith. It's not that we don't want you. It's just this is what the contract structure is. What if we give you escalators that can give you an extra $1,000,000 if you do perform as well as you think that
Mhm.
you can? And so it's a little bit of an olive branch. Saquon Barkley gets to save face. If he performs well, he gets a little bit of extra money. And I think the goodwill between the Giants and Saquon kind of stays intact right now.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think that either now we said that Saquon Barkley had changed representation this offseason as well, not unlike Daniel Jones did around his contract negotiations. But I'll be honest with you, somebody also suggested this possibility that, like, I think Saquon just did not know how to handle the negotiation situation. Like, he mismanaged this about as bad as you could. And it's funny because you say, like, if Saquon takes a step back and puts himself in Joe Schoen's shoes, like, I don't know if he's doing that. Like, and no player needs to do it, but it just feels like Saquon Barkley for everything that he is. And this isn't a knock on him. Like, I'm not, the shrewdest businessman in the world. It just seemed like Saquon Barkley was sitting there kind of being like, I think I deserve more money. And they were like, yeah, that's just not where the market. He's like, yeah, but I really want more money. And they're like, yeah, but we have other things we need to take care of. Like, it just didn't feel like he had a real business sense of what was going on, what the best way to do it was, including if you're going to communicate something like potentially, whether it was legitimate or not, should I say F it and sit out? Now, again, he was conveying, should I do this thing? That's an option that I could have. yes, it is an option you do have. Either you have to do it or don't do it. But you can't say that you could do it and then say it's not something that I really want to do. Like, you know what I mean? It's like he gave up all of the leverage in an already very, very low leverage situation for him. It's just brutal, man. But I just think that these are probably some really hard business lessons that he learned this offseason and going back to last year as well.
Yeah, and obviously you saw that he added another agent into the mix in the middle of the negotiations because they clearly were not going well. He wasn't getting the money that was originally offered before they put the tag on him. And Joe Schoen stuck to his guns. And I think, you know what? I can't speculate because no one has actually come out and told us any of this. Like, was his agency saying, have faith in us, we will get you more money than you've ever thought? And he's like, hey, I just want to play football and be a Giant. Like, whatever the best deal is at the end of the day, like, I'll take that deal. Or were they coming to him saying, here's the contract offer, we think it's good, you should take it? And he said, no, I want to hold out for more money, I think I'm worth more. We don't really know the dynamic on that. And so that's why I'm not going to crucify Saquon Barkley. I'm not going to crucify the agents that he's brought in because you just don't know who was ultimately doing it. We know that they work for Saquon and he could say, take whatever deal is on the table. But I don't know. That whole part to me was a little bit challenging. Like, who actually is to blame? Saquon hires these people because they have the contract acumen. He just wants to play football.
Oh, yeah, of course. And at that point, you just steer clear of it and let your agents do the negotiations. Quick note here on the incentives: $10.1 million fully guaranteed, $2 million signing bonus, $1 million in incentives, which include 1,300 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 65 receptions. The deal does not include a no franchise tag clause, obviously going back to the offseason, everything that's gone on, and into next offseason. So we can be right back here in the same position potentially with the tag being on the table. That number has increased. The overall total value of what would be the 2-year cycle of this thing ends up being a little bit north of $24 million, if I'm not mistaken. And as Andy is accurately providing, you don't know what goes on behind the scenes of this podcast. 1,312 yards last year for Saquon Barkley, 10 touchdowns, and 57 pass receptions. So very interesting, right? Because again, I'm going to go right back to Joe Schoen here and say, boy, you're setting kind of like you're threading the needle perfectly here to be like, Saquon Barkley, you're telling us that you are the best running back in the league, and you arguably are, right? So great incentives, man. Little extra cash on the table. All you have to do, really what this is saying is be healthy. If you're healthy, then you can come pretty close to these benchmarks. Now, what I find fascinating is you go back and look at the first half of the year and then the second half of the season. And I think this is where Andy's going to go. I can make the case that with the additions on the offensive side of the ball and with another year in the system of Kafka and Daniel Jones, it's not going to be hard if the Giants so choose to mitigate the opportunities for Saquon Barkley to actually catch all of these incentives. Not that that's the game plan here. He could get every single incentive if it meant the Giants are winning football games, going to the playoffs, and being a real threat in the East.
First things first is when you look at what he did last year, you mentioned 1,312 rushing yards. The escalators in his contract asked for 1,350. So he has to go above what he did last year in a great season. The 10 touchdowns that he had last year, in the contract for the incentives, he needs 11 touchdowns. He didn't even do that last year in a great season. 57 pass catches in 2022. They made the number 65 in the next year. So he has to do better in every single statistical category in what he deemed a great year in order to hit any of those bonuses. And Adam, this is where some of the nerdy contractual stuff is also really fascinating to me. The first thing is, this is also all contingent on the Giants making the playoffs. All of these incentives become null and void if the Giants don't make the postseason. So not only is Joe Schoen saying you have to hit these crazy things and play well, but it has to be contributing to a winning team, which I found fascinating to think about. It's like, we're willing to pay you if your statistical success correlates to us making the playoffs and team success. That to me was really, really interesting how you structure it.
Oh, of course. And I think you and I both talked about this when we were saying about what's the contract for Saquon Barkley when the negotiations were going on this offseason in totality. It was like, why not make it performance-based, right? Why not make it? And now, by the way, shame on me. Turns out I wouldn't be as good a GM as Joe Schoen, because at the time I was saying, okay, the baseline is, it's whatever. I think it's somewhere 8 to 10 million, say, right? But I said you can pay him all up to 15 million if he's hitting all of these benchmarks, right? Going to the playoffs, having something like this, having over 1,300 yards, having 11 or 12 touchdowns, big reception numbers, like awesome. What I find fascinating too here is not included inside of that is total yards. Because if you're talking about setting a benchmark for 65 receptions and 1,300 rushing yards, what would it be? Be a 2,000 yard all purpose back? Like maybe that's the number. But there's like all the, again, it's such a fine line of being like 65 receptions over 17 games. That's effectively 4 catches per game he's going to need to average. That doesn't seem like a ton, right? You're like, 4 catches, Saquon Barkley, you can drop one off out of the backfield. Oh my God, yeah, he just accidentally fell into 4 catches. But Paris Campbell, and now you also brought in Waller, right? And you have Hyatt, and you have all the, it's like there's only so many passes to go around for Daniel Jones that can get mitigated. And I let's get into a little bit of a different thing here, because that's all the incentives and everything else, and that's great. It seems to be that the sense is he'll be in camp, awesome, and we can go ahead and just start to like the energy around this seems to be so positive. I don't know. And there was a speculation about, did some teams try to come to the trade table for Saquon Barkley last year? That seemed to get mostly pushed away. Art Stapleton referenced a couple of trusted sources in around the Giants organization that agreed with Saquon that nothing like that ever actually went down last year. Miami was being discussed. Fine. Does this take all of that off the table? Like 100%? Like everybody seems to be saying, awesome. Saquon's back. Nothing to worry about. Let's get this year going. To me, it doesn't dramatically change what Joe Schoen is thinking entering this season. We want him to be healthy, want him to be a part of it, want him to be a big piece. It doesn't change how I think next year is going to go. Probably going to be the tag talk again. Maybe they'll discuss a longer-term deal. I don't know if this really changed anything shy of saying we're all happy that Saquon's going to be in camp. It helps this season, but it doesn't change the dynamic to me between Saquon and the organization and what they want the future to look like.
I have a little bit of a different take. This might be where you and I kind of have differing views on this. I think what Joe Schoen did, extending this olive branch and giving him the upfront money and just saying, I don't have to put these escalators in, but I will because we want to keep goodwill and good grace. Jordan Renan even said it as well on Twitter. He said, I don't think this is about the 2023 contract as much as the 2024 contract and keeping goodwill and good grace. Because listen, if Saquon Barkley plays well, you want him to have the desire to stay here. And if Joe Schoen didn't want Saquon Barkley around or thought about trading him mid-year, you just say, show up when you show up, Saquon. We don't need you in camp. We just need you for the season. We'll run you into the ground and we'll ship you off to whoever comes calling. I think what Joe Schoen did was keep the ability for Saquon to be around in 2024 in play, also by not embarrassing him. Like if you embarrass Saquon Barkley completely and he feels ostracized by the organization and says they want to make me look foolish, they want to win every single contractual battle instead of partnering with me, then I need to go somewhere else. This little olive branch is enough for like everyone to have that goodwill that you mentioned. So there is an opportunity that it's not just going to be a one-year thing for Saquon.
All right, maybe you're right. I again keep coming back to being like, saying like, oh, like you don't want Saquon, let him save some face or whatever. Again, I look at it as being like, yeah, great. We set borderline. This is Pro Bowl caliber play. Anything goes wrong, you miss one game this year, it can take every single one of those incentives right off the table in this contract. I gave you again, this isn't how Joe Schoen is framing it, but it's like that's all it took. Extra $900,000 to get you to come into camp. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, that's nothing. I just signed a 5-year 117 for Andrew Thomas. All I had to do was throw you about $1 million to get you into camp, make sure that this year was going to be as successful as possible, dangle the carrot. The next offseason, we'll go right back to the table. And I guess that's my thing. Again, make it very clear. Ecstatic that Barkley's going to be here. We have said from the beginning in lockstep, where we have agreed is, I would love Saquon Barkley to be a New York Giant for life. That is what I would desire. Just like, Tiki Barber before everyone turned on him in his post-playing career for a while. But like next year, what is it going to be? What is the number? 3 for 40, 13.5 million. Well, guess what? You're a year older now. That number is going to come down a little bit. You talked about maybe the market comes back up a little in the running back department. Okay, maybe. Or maybe Josh Jacobs and all these other guys that are on tags too are going to be right back out there potentially looking for their deals as well. Like, I just don't see a lot dramatically changing next offseason where the Giants are going to come to the table and say, hey, we're right back where we were. The only difference I'll say here is inside of that, was there trade discussions, whatever. it also came out that it's like, remember, Joe Schoen and the Giants went back to Saquon Barkley 3 different times with 3 different constructions of a contract. So there was this thing happening, right? Like the Giants were saying, we are willing to try to figure this out. The numbers just aren't quite lining up here. And in that regard, remember, now on the 1-year deal, the Giants can try to negotiate with Saquon Barkley in season this year as well. That would not have been afforded because it's not tag applied now anymore, correct?
Well, it's an amendment to the tag, so technically they still aren't allowed to do some negotiation, but that
Ooh.
doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be conversations about what a
Okay, well,
multi-year
see, but
deal
I
could
would have
look like
liked,
at the
yeah.
end.
But if I was Saquon, so good, it's good catch there because the amendment. If I was Saquon, I would want to be able to negotiate this season because
Oh, of
what if I
course.
get hurt in week 11? What if I get hurt in week 12? Right?
What I think this does, Adam, and you alluded to it, is listen, let's say Saquon Barkley plays well. He's the Saquon Barkley of old, and he looks great. He has a similar production to what he did last year. The Giants make the playoffs again. You would look at it and say, we want to keep Saquon here. We want him happy and productive. Could you do it at the end of the season? Could you do a 2-year, $20 million deal where he gets 2 $10 million contracts with the Giants, where it's like we basically buy the franchise tag for next season and we keep you with guaranteed money one more year past that? Like if he continues
But
his
why? Yeah, but
production,
why would Saquon want that though? Why
well,
again?
because
Like
you
I guess
play
that's
on
my
the
point. It's like why is Saquon saying like, oh great, yeah, another 10 million for 2 years, great. Like
well, because you look at Dalvin Cook, you look at Leonard Fournette, you look at Ezekiel Elliott. At some point, when you get to 27, 28, 29 years old, the multi-year contracts with all the guaranteed money just isn't there anymore. So if you could guarantee yourself an additional year, make sure you stay with the team that drafted you, and you'll end up making $65 million in the NFL as a running back. That seems like a pretty good deal. Like sometimes we get
yeah.
it hell bent, like when is enough enough? Like what if
Well,
it is enough and he just wants to play football for the Giants?
well, here's my other couple of things. And people have talked about this before. And Carl Banks came out and he said Saquon Barkley should turn around and use his profile in New York to create the additional money, the additional capital off of being in a large media market and endorsements and deals, etc. And I agree with that in principle because you can. And we've said this before. Yes, you have better opportunities. But I don't think it's a very flawed way to think about it if you're Saquon Barkley in his camp, because you are immediately then signaling to the Giants, yeah, the contract doesn't matter as much. I'm going to go make X, Y, and Z. Now, I'd be fascinated to find out if like the Giants PR department and the Giants, because they're tied into these endorsements as well. Maybe the Giants, maybe that's a part of what Joe Schoen will do in the background and say, hey, we're going to push you as the product side of Saquon Barkley and make sure that we get you out in front of as many eyes and get you endorsement deals and show you that we can't give you the money on the books, but we can help you create it off the books. I still think that's a really flawed way to do it because you're devaluing your actual, value as a player and it on the books, and you're devaluing the market for the rest of running backs, right? Positional value is going to say the market's at an all-time low for running backs, and you're telling me don't worry about it. Guess what? I play in Cincinnati. I play for Houston, whatever it may be. I don't have those endorsement opportunities. So how is every other running back at the position supposed to be successful that way? So I wanted to get your quick thoughts on that. And also understanding that while I agree with you about, yes, at some point the timeline runs out, I don't think that Saquon Barkley looks at it any differently today than he did yesterday. I am one of the best running backs. I deserve to be paid as such. And if he has a 1,500 catch, 11 touchdown year, he's not coming back next offseason and going, you know what? I do know that at some point I'm going to drop off here. So why don't I take a sweetheart deal a year ahead of time? Like I just, you know what I mean? Like you can never do that. And no athlete ever thinks that way about themselves.
I understand. I think when you join a Zoom call and you see all these other super talented guys that aren't getting contracts, it's not personal and it's not about you. And maybe you start to
Sure.
think philosophically like, oh, maybe there is a bigger problem. If I want to stay with the Giants, let's figure out how that works. Yeah, the off the field stuff, listen, that's what Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys have been selling to everyone is like, if you wear that star for long enough, look at Troy
Right.
Aikman in the booth. Like you look at Tony Romo in the booth. You can be
Yeah.
whoever you want to
Look at
be post
Ezekiel
playing
Elliott.
career.
We cut him.
Yeah, and then we just jettison Ezekiel Elliott, never to be heard from again. But yeah, I mean the offseason, off the field stuff. You make up a good point though. Like some of these other running backs may be like, hey, I don't have that profile in Green Bay. Like how am I
Yeah.
supposed to get these endorsement deals? And so you'd be hurting people as a whole. Honestly, I'm just really excited that Saquon's back in the building. Andrew Thomas is back in the building with a minted new deal, and everyone is excited about training camp.
Yeah, this is such a broader conversation overall, but ultimately that is the short term thing was, oh man, Saquon Barkley's going to be in camp. Great. He won't be tired legs come the beginning of the season. We don't have to worry about developing in the new system and how he can benefit and play off of having Darren Waller and having Paris Campbell in the room. So that's what we know we'll be watching here as the camps get underway this off season. The last note, turning our attention to the training camp, is just kind of where we stand coming in the door here. Dan Duggan will give him the credit on this one. A lot of other people, Art Stapleton and others, obviously around the organization, have been covering this. But the Giants announced that wide receiver Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, Marcus McCathan, and A'Shawn Robinson, along with DJ Davidson and Aaron Robinson, were placed on the PUP list. Before we talk about guys that were going to be some guys that could be replacing them, and specifically on Sterling Shepard, a pretty exciting note about that. Who's your biggest concern on that list? On that list, who is your biggest boy? Really wish that this player could have been ready to go here for camp.
To be honest with you, none. The reason why is because putting someone on the PUP list, which is the physically unable to perform list, this early on in training camp isn't actually an indicator of whether or not they're going to miss games. Obviously, yep. It's discouraging when someone gets put on a list where you're literally physically unable to perform your job. But it's a tool and a mechanism the Giants have at their disposal to allow more people in camp, to give more people looks at different positions. You already know what you're getting from Sterling Shepard. As long as he's doing work off to the side and you see how he's getting healthy, you already know what you're getting from some of these different players that you're putting on the PUP list, like Jamison Crowder, seasoned veteran, seasoned pro. Doesn't matter if he's going to be out of camp for a couple of days. So I'm not necessarily concerned. What I will say is, I really am interested to find out what happens with Wan'Dale Robinson, because he was one of the biggest skill positions that Joe Schoen put his chips to the center of the table at and said, I think this guy can be a game changer, even though he was a little bit smaller in size and injury was a concern potentially for him in the NFL. I'm curious if he's going to be ready to go for week one. If some of these signings like Cole Beasley, are depth pieces because they're unsure if he's going to be there for the first 4 games of the season. For me, I'd really like to see him make some progress to feel confident that he's going to be around at least within the first couple of weeks of the season.
Yeah, you said this at the time of the draft pick, right? When Wan'Dale Robinson was drafted, I said, "Hey, man, go look at the tape. It's exciting." And to your credit, you were like, "Yep, it's awesome. I just worry about his size and him being injured." And so far, that's been the case. So you would like to see him get healthy sooner than later. A positive note on Sterling Shepard is they actually think that he's progressing really well and that he shouldn't be on the PUP list for too long, which is a good sign for him because, it's easy to forget a guy like this. But if you put everybody healthy in that wide receiver room on paper, Sterling Shepard is near at the top of that list in terms of talent level and what he could mean for this offensive system if he can be healthy even at 30 plus years old. The other one to me that stood out was Aaron Robinson, just because now you think about, you get Banks in the draft, you know that you have a Dory Jackson, you feel really good about that. You have Cordell Flott. And by the way, we'll get into this as the week goes on here about some of the rumblings about what Cordell Flott's been up to this offseason in a very positive way. But Robinson, it's just been unfortunate appendicitis and, keeps him out of the lineup and all these things. You just would have liked to now, if you go, hey, you want some pressure off you? You don't have to be the number 2 anymore, as we once upon a time thought. Now you can just be in the 3 room and you can be this piece and you have a little more size. Unfortunate for him because it starts to paint a little bit of a dimmer picture about where he is in this pecking order as you go into camp potentially. So it's just unfortunate because I think once upon a time we were both pretty excited about what he could be for this team.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Aaron Robinson. The Giants need to find a reliable third cornerback. You know that there's obviously injuries during the regular season, but with how pass-happy teams are getting in the NFL, nickel coverage and nickel cornerbacks become ever more important in the grand scheme of things. So, listen, you have Cordell Flott, who you feel, the Giants drafted, they like him a lot. You've got Adoree Jackson. You got to find someone like Aaron Robinson, like my man Rodarius Williams, like an Aaron Robinson. You got to find someone that can step up and fill that role and at least be serviceable in a third quarterback role. You really want to see Aaron Robinson get out there to get a little bit more tape and get his feet underneath him. So yeah, you're right. That's one to monitor for sure.
That being the case, man, there's been some additions into this room. There's been some already moves that have been made. Ellerson Smith, we hardly knew ye, never got a chance, and he will not have a chance as he was let go, injured designation from the New York Football Giants. And that's the nature of the beast, man. Guys that you sit there, and Aaron Robinson, I think, is like in this category of like you're waiting, you're hoping, you're dreaming on. And then guess what? It's somebody else's opportunity because you get older and the draft classes come in and young guys look better. And that's really what training camp is all about. To your point, getting a look at some of these younger guys, seeing who steps up and takes on these roles. I think you and I both agree interior offensive line is going to be really fascinating to watch. Azudu was there, not getting listed on the PUP list, not having any concerns around injuries. He can get in there and battle. Inside linebacker is going to be really exciting to watch. We've been waiting for the Darian Beaver show to begin here, right? So we're breaking this down all summer long. Obviously, very excited to see here. And guess what, man? Like, in a couple days, it's going to be August, and then like that's it, man. We are now officially entering into the build up to the regular season. Get some excitement going, and really start to think about what this team can accomplish. Which, by the way, yes, next time we're back, we'll talk about win total projections that have been coming out lately, because it doesn't look like the New York Football Giants are getting the respect that they potentially deserve. In the meantime, you get over to YouTube and you subscribe to the channel. You turn on those alerts so you know when we're going live. You get us on your podcast feeds where, of course, we're doing it every single week for you. And as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand you, the fine people, know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.